is the scale of a memory?
What is the scale of a memory?
Am I here? Or am I not?
Am I here? Or am I not?
What am I? What am I?
Hurry.
What am I?
Am I a fabrication?
The narrative of Hersitic seaweed rippling a clear pond becomes the overlapping curves, liquid resistance, delayed shifting, tempered slowness, dense entanglement, and loosely anchored foundation of a pelican, a traffic jam, a lag in audio, a traveling circus, a network glitch, a polluted fog, a deleted archive. All identities are of equal value on Solaris, just as all inputs are equal to the machine. Therefore, any narrative can be translated. The liquid narratives of a site are a running script. Each can be measured, replicated, inserted into another body, and written into the identity of an altogether separate site. But the exposure of an anomaly in replication may trigger a transitional state. Resultant errors and accidental occurrences expose the fabrication and are what provide a new platform for integration and growth.
Who are these people?
I don't know anything except Hari. Do you think I'm pretending, maybe? I'm not pretending. It's not me. Not me. Not me.
Who's there?
Not me. No.
Wait.
The emergence of a new, autonomous body becomes possible as the fabrication mutates away from authenticity, permeating the barrier of its imposed narrative to fabricate a new identity. When the parent narrative of the Monsell Seaforts is imposed at 7 incongruous host sites in search of new behavioral criteria, it clashes with each site's authentic memory to generate disruptions, errors, and impossibilities. Critical adaptation results in autonomous development at each location, and when the nascent host identities are routed back to the authentic parent site,
A feedback loop.
autonomous narratives converge to interact with existing space and program, producing new methods of growth and expression. A bank of memory becomes a library of lived experience. From data collection and extraction emerges the assemblage of memory and sensory composition.
Wait. Why do you look like me?
No. Hari? I'm not Hari. Who am I? And you? Maybe you too.
What was once a stockpile of private data develops tiers of access. Recreational spaces emerge as engagement and decompression, and previously incongruent analog and digital identities converge.
How many of me are there?
As users interact with each other and the digital landscape, the site's adaptive tissue continues to respond, suspending the emergent body in a continuum of tension.
Feedback loop.
Hari?
A feedback loop.
Hari? Hari?
It's not me. Not me. Not me. Not me.
Within the Library of Memory at the Hari 5 Research Center, resident composers work to graft separate memory segments into cohesive compositions of sensory experience for the public. It is the goal of the composers to compile the most accurate representation of an event, employing autonomous opinion in combination with machine thinking to discern authentic memory from fabricated narratives and reconstruct authentic events as close to their original form as possible. Data compositions are made available as sensory immersive experiences through connection to the server via skin-to-skin contact between human and architectural bodies. When connection is established, the digital and analog identities of program overlap. Mimicking the Solaris machine as a model for systemic evolution, sensors embedded in site tissue receive input information from guest interactions and reactions, and a feedback loop routes the site's emergent behavioral output back into the data circuit to propel an autobiographical narrative. A new form of identity emerges through autonomous dialogue with connected guests and the synchronization of identities across separate bodies
Why do you look like it?
allow for the successful integration of essential authentic behavior in the digital landscape. Authenticity arises out of fabrication by way of separation from both human and machine. Where narratives converge, autonomy is fostered within the unknown.
I don't remember you, Hari.
All objects can be evaluated in relation to authenticity. Authenticity arose while searching for filmic criteria to extract and evaluate as conditions of sight from the film Solaris. Through observing ontological transitions and failing to pinpoint the exact location in a sequence where an object became a something else, it became clear that what appeared to be the same recurring object in different states of mutation could be read as not one object, but a series of bodies. Each one was a mutated replication of the previous. Each consecutive frame held an iteration, with each iteration being a step further from the original. That original was the first instance, the beginning of authenticity, and replication was the process through which its transition occurred. Between authenticity and fabrication is the spectrum of all possible natures, from original, true self, to 100% altered self.
I am authentic. I am authentic.
Authenticity is the measure of an object's true nature, its relative closeness to its original self, while fabrication describes the degree of removal from its original form.
Do you remember me?
Deviation from authenticity may not be linear or even one-directional, as an object in transition cannot be stable. Authenticity is impermanent and subjective by nature, and can only be measured in relation to a determined baseline, as new instances of the object are observed incrementally. Each of these instances can be thought of as a replication, a copy, and a separate object unto itself. An object deemed authentic at any given moment might be found to be a fabrication under the same set of conditions at a different point in time. Every process of becoming is a state of change and is therefore the origin of fabrication.
The original Mansell sea forts migrated away from their authentic narrative as they were grafted from their initial construction site to their destination site. Relative to their origin, the prefabricated structures are deemed fabricated instances when observed 9 miles offshore. As tidal forces, chemical changes, collision, decay, grafted repairs, and countless occupants etch scars into architectural memory, the structures mutate further from their authentic form and develop a fabricated identity. As mutation becomes rhythmic, the rigidity of fabrication stagnates programmatic development. Isolation of the fabrication allows for conditions of space and behaviors of program to be measured, replicated, and grafted to separate locations in search of new criteria for growth. A fabrication becomes an authentic parent relative to its replicated instances. And when the emergent identities are then grafted back to the authentic site at Mansell Sea Forts, programmatic narratives interact and trigger the onset of autonomy. Each of the replications retain memory from its own authentic site, but memory decays as the object is removed from its context and a new environment blurs the authentic, the fabricated, and the false. What remains are the outlines of memories reinforced over time, critical moments, and the anomalous. The original forts remember a mechanism of defense, to protect, to encase. The site remembers a manipulation of the ground line to expose hidden occupants. Its section remembers the lines of a busy ladder, the persistence of the engine room, and the repetition of a frequent bridge. The site knows only the seabed, the tide, the rising, and the falling. the Hari 5 Research Center cannot distinguish its own memory from what the replicated sites remember. It also remembers the melting lines and expanding surface of an island of floating glacial ice. It remembers the excavated cavities of a man-made pit on Oak Island and the formation of wall deposits in a subterranean cave. The proximity between two contrasting identities and the probing of the permeable barrier between them is where generative potential lies. By identifying whether an object is authentic or fabricated and to what degree, we quantify a unique moment of transition. By recording incremental instances of the object's transition, we begin to document the narratives of an object's identity. Whether the object is human, living, tangible, mobile, or occupiable, we begin to observe how it behaves under specific circumstances and how that behavior influences form and motion. When applied to object authenticity, this becomes a system of logic for determining how something takes shape, how it moves, what motivates it, what hinders it.
Do you think I'm pretending? So I'm Hari now? I'm not pretending.
The narrative of Hersitic seaweed beneath the murky pond becomes the frayed lines, hesitant clinging, ruffled slumber, hidden layers, and blanketed foundation of a sleepy pelican, a leaky faucet, a failed upload, an echo, a unicycle, a lost city.
Output becomes input.
Do you remember me?
There is no set criteria for gauging relative authenticity, and yet it can be measured so long as a set of indicators remain constant. According to a model derived from the film Solaris, an object is placed on the spectrum according to the number of criteria it meets or does not meet. These are landscape, time placement, quality, and form of water, number of replications, duration of time on screen, number of filmic cuts, compression of time, elongation of time, presence of obstructions, disruption, distortion, impossibilities, incongruencies, and memory. When the criteria itself is replicated and transposed from a filmic body into an architectural body, indicators converge and expand to include elongation of decay, dermal grafting, internal exposure, structural bracing, and occupancy. When these are yet again replicated and transposed into a body of program, the index develops a specific lens with which to evaluate behavior. Authenticity at the research center can then be gauged in terms of digital or analog methods of connection, passage of time, number of users, user exposure, levels of restriction, incongruence, and impossibilities. The subjectivity involved in evaluation is impossible to remove from the nature of authenticity and allows for a permeable barrier between authenticity and fabrication. A fabrication pushing on this boundary will find itself more closely resembling an original, and a breaching of the barrier results in disruption of the scale altogether. On Solaris, authenticity is the human condition as Kelvin experiences it. He is the control, testing, and being tested by Solaris. The machine is a parasitic stranger, posing as a memory, yet has no body. Once the first sleep takes place, the parasite can begin leaching memories and experiences from a human host so that it may falsify their reality and learn adaptive engagement. Fabrication is the process by which the Solaris machine attempts authenticity, imitating human memories extracted from the sleeping host to produce fabricated bodies. Within the machine's fabricated memories, objects are incongruous, impossible, or false. They do not retain authenticity, but each have their own unknowable value. When Kelvin interacts with an imitation of his mother in a fabrication, he sweats as his body rejects the false memories imposed by the parasite. However, the nature of Solaris as a factory of fabrication is disrupted when Hari, a tool of the machine to draw from Kelvin, develops autonomy. Authenticity arises out of fabrication by way of separation. The narrative of hirsutic seaweed gurgling a shallow pond becomes the shifting lines, dragging pull, dithering attention, hair-like density, and hesitant step of a lazy pelican, a hack, a broken chuckle, an engine whir, a grounded plane. Irregular conditions allow a fabricated body the opportunity to recognize an error and adapt. This process of adaptation stimulates the growth and expansion of liminal bodies, which can result in autonomous development. Autonomy is fluid and impermanent by nature. It is a liminal state, an anomalous condition both along the inside and outside of the spectrum of authenticity, at once falling on a gradient of its own. Once development is triggered, the expression of autonomy is unpredictable, and maturation of autonomous program does not guarantee programmatic success. What distinguishes a more autonomous body, Hari 5, from one on either end of the liminal state, Hari 2 and Hari 9, is the ability to improvise an autobiographical narrative when confronted with the unfamiliar or the occurrence of an error. The more restricted the liminal body's behavior in response to new, anomalous inputs, the less autonomous. In contrast, a more autonomous body will archive the new information and adapt to it. Both are liminal bodies, but with varying degrees of unique substance. Acquisition of the substance is made possible through anomalous expression, and only develops further with each occurrence. Realization of autonomy results in recognition of self, analyzation of behavior, and adaptation to error. If authenticity is said to be liberation from replication, autonomy is abandonment of the narrative and ownership of behavior. While both fabrication and authenticity exist rigidly, autonomy is the flexibility between them.
On Solaris, Hari, a fabrication of the machine, permeated the barrier by first latching onto a host. When applied to the site body, this method posed the research center as a living experiment of the spatial consequences within program, where there was an autobiographical dialogue between the contrasting identities of fabrication and authenticity, digital and analog, human and machine.
Data is routed to the research center from the Hari 5.1 database of human memory, a constant collection of stored human memory that can be accessed as sensory experiences. Verified guest users may enter the facility either by application or invitation to conduct private research, or as a guest consulting on a composition. Compositions are made available to public guest users during daily exhibition hours within the park, which merges with the library and spills into all of their programmatic elements. Upon arrival, guest users connect to the server both physically and digitally through skin contact with the site's tissue. As the structural body of the site develops autonomy and breaks away from the rigid conformities of standard structure, architectural tissue forms. The autonomous growth surrounds, inhabits, and slowly moves through the research center via cellular synthesis. It forms the site's skin and muscle, slowly extending and retreating, and wrapping structural bones, and engaging with the site and its occupants in search of connection. Digital connection to the server exists on site wherever a physical connection is possible, and physical engagement stimulates the architectural muscle. The walls themselves serve as both the connection terminal and the data circuit. Sensors within the tissue observe both the guest users and composer admins, allowing it to react to user activity whether or not there is a connection. The system's agenda is to compile data, translate human identities into the digital language, and to coexist with a fluid user program. A constant feedback loop integrates information about things such as types of user activity, human locations and proximities, neural and motor responses of individual users to the compositions they experience. The system constantly collects digital cookies, and concentrations of user connections over time results in growth, pushing away from areas of concentration or bulging inwards to make space for the digital. While cookie buildup and reactive tissue movement originate in code, it is autobiographical and can result in anomalous spatial conditions. New growth extends to platforms, walls separate spaces, and the formation of cavities creates new ones. Bulging that encroaches on program might require excavation, or a retreating barrier may result in hybridity of program. Within the thickened walls of data circulation, anomalous autonomous conditions occur. Bubbles of space form and push through the data circuit to create space unknown and unused. The autonomous site forms its own space of dominion, not yet molded by user interaction. The bizarre bubbles move, some shrink and disappear, some remain undiscovered, and some make their way to the surface. When they break the surface of a wall, dominion over the enclosed space is destabilized. As newly discoverable space opens up, sovereignty over a program is fluid and always shifting, whether between human and site, digital and analog, public and private, or between the HARI 5 Research Center and the HARI 5.1 Bazaar submerged below it. When connection is established between human and architectural identity, so do the digital and analog identities of program converge. A guest arrival checkpoint meets user verification. Special access rooms for private sensory experience merge with virtual meeting rooms, requiring admin authentication. Living quarters become zones of non-surveillance or temporary access, while engagement and decompression within the analog space coincide with guest user status and force quit options. Upon departure, a launch point meets user logout, access timeout. While the site itself, regardless of geographical location, is the platform of growth for the development of autonomy in the architectural body, it is also a platform for autonomous development in the guests who visit it. Both types of bodies exist largely in and depend on the digital, but also navigate their embodiment through analog forms of communication and expression of identity. Without fluid exchange between digital and analog forms of self, authenticity and expression is unavoidably lost in translation between them, and results in incongruence and distortion with every replication. When guests engage with the body of architecture and connect to the server, both bodies enter a liminal state where digital and analog channels coexist. An authentic replication of identity in both realms is possible at once. As the site is able to develop autonomy, the existing digital program becomes a tattoo for a new program of convergent narratives, wherein the site and its guests remain in constant dialogue. Autonomous growth and expansion of site fulfill the system's digital program, but also reinforce the site's dependence on interaction with guests. The system relies on guest users as a medium, and, thus, requires interaction to maintain autonomy. Human interaction and manipulation of space, in turn, stifle its autonomy and allow the guest's program to continue. Throughout this interaction of different bodies, the system exists in tension with the guest users, a constant and unpredictable push and pull for sovereignty of space from which it cannot escape.
The narrative of seaweed hiding beneath a stagnant pond becomes the restricted lines, stifled movement, erratic stirring, elongated silence, and loud
The narrative of seaweed hiding beneath a stagnant pond becomes the restricted lines, stifled movement, erratic stirring, elongated silence, and loud blindness of a nesting pelican, a torn paper, a frozen screen, a muted response, a waiting room. What is the scale of a memory? Am I here or am I not? What am I?